Palouse. I'm so happy to be with everyone this evening. It was a great honor to be asked to facilitate this talk this evening as part of our Conservation Talk series. I spent a lot of time reminiscing about Koppel Farm, as I'm sure many of the folks who are on this talk have done as well. And what a special place it is to me, both in my life, personally and professionally. And right away, I realized, well, there's no way I can do this talk alone. I've been a part of many folks, many partner groups, community groups, volunteers, and others who have done so much incredible work at Koppel Farm and have worked to keep it a centerpiece of our community. And so a couple of the folks I thought of right away are with us this evening. We have Timothy Paulitz, who is a board member for the Pullman Community Gardens, and he's going to share some of the history and some of the work that they've done down at Koppel. And then we have Jeff Sellen with us this evening, who is one of the co-founders of GroundWorks Institute and got a lot of the restoration work started down at Koppel Farm. So it's going to be a great opportunity for us to hear from some of the partners. I'm excited to hear some of the stories and the history. And then I will be sharing some of my own experience working with Koppel as both a volunteer as well as part of the Palouse Conservation District. So I'll be talking about some of the current and future work that we will be doing out there as well. And then there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions, discussion, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have somebody in the audience who might also want to share an experience or a story or talk about how Koppel has been important to them and their community engagement out there as well. So I would welcome that as part of our evening time together. We're here really to celebrate this incredible special place in our community and learn a little bit more about it. So thanks so much for sharing some of your time with us this evening. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition us into our first segment on looking at the history of restoration at Koppel. And the first person who will be sharing with us this evening is Tim Paulitz. As I mentioned, Tim is with us this evening live, but he also provided a presentation that he pre-recorded for us this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started for us.
The history of the garden starts up with this church, the Greystone Church on College Hill. And you may ask, what does this church historical building have to do with the garden? So this building, 1898 by a famous Pullman architect, William Swain, and it was the home of the Presbyterian Church from that time until about 1963, when they built their new church closer to campus. Then it was sold to the Catholic Church for a campus ministry, and then it was abandoned in 1997. So in 1998, the Greystone Foundation was founded as a nonprofit to try to preserve the church and make it into a historical landmark. So they worked on that for a few years, but they also had this idea of starting a community garden in 1993. And they ran the garden all the way through the 1990s into the early 2000s, at which point they dissolved and switched their name over to Pullman Community Garden. And in fact, on all the IRS documents, we're still listed as the Greystone Foundation. And I kind of think of the Greystone Foundation as the Pullman Civic Trust of the day. They had quite a bit of community involvement. And talking to Mike Koppel and trying to reconstruct some of the oral history of what happened, he talks about Bob Wayne, who was a Pullman optometrist, approach, and he was part of the Greystone Foundation, approached Selma Koppel and her grandson Mike in about 1992 to talk about the idea of a community garden. And Mike tells the story of his grandmother having this dream about gardeners and thought that this was a good idea. So she was very, very supportive of this. Unfortunately, she passed away later on in 1992, and her husband passed away in 1994. This is a picture of Selma and Franz's gravestone in the Pullman City Cemetery. So they would have been the second generation on that farm. There's a very good explanation of the Koppel dairy farm on this interpretive sign, which is near the garden along the trail. It was started in the early 1900s by Swiss immigrants. Selma and Franz would have been the second generation, and then the present people that we lease from are the fourth generation. One of the landmarks of the garden is this shed. And people have often asked the question, who built it, how was it designed, etc. And I did a little bit of an investigation talking. And it turns out, again, it was a project spearheaded by Bob Wayne, that Pullman optometrist. And he invited Jack Sobon for a workshop in 1993. And Jack Sobon was a very well-known architect who was instrumental in this movement of timber design. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. The project was started in 1993 and then completed in 1996. So Jack was this architect who wrote this book called Timber Frame Construction. And he's built over 60 of these structures using traditional timber framing. And if you look inside the shed itself, there's no metal brackets or everything. All the joinery is done using dowels. And another thing about the garden was that we completed an irrigation system around 1995. In the early 2000s, we built the picnic structure, which was designed and built by WSU Construction Design class, Robert Barnstone. So they had a competition for design, and then we accepted that. So they structure, and we provided all the materials. Here's an example of it. And we use this for all of our events, picnics, potlucks, etc. So it's really been an important addition to the garden. The other project I'll just mention, we just finished, it took us about 2 years, was the Disability Accessible Garden, ADA Garden, the first one in the Palouse, designed and built by another WSU class with Michael Sanchez, landscape architecture class. It was a similar thing where they came up with a design and put together the whole thing over a 2-year period. And this is a picture at the dedication last September. So that's Michael Sanchez showing the new plot. So it's got 6 raised beds that wheelchairs can access, and they're filled with potting mix and soil. And so this is all completely accessible by wheel. This is a dedication plaque showing all the different groups that gave us money to do this, including Innovia, the Christopher Reeves Foundation, United Way, City of Pullman, etc. This just shows you the sidewalk that we constructed that goes from the parking lot to the plot itself. So again, the Pullman Community Garden started in 1993. We're a nonprofit, no employees, no paid employees. We're governed by a board of directors. We have about 100 plots. Most of them are 20 by 20 plots, and about the rest of them are smaller 10 by 10 plots. We're financed completely by plot fees, by grants, proceeds from our spring fair, and from other donations. This is an aerial view of the garden. So what we're showing here is the 3 acres that is actually under garden plots. We also lease an additional total of 11 acres from the Koppel estate. And that includes some land by the river. And I think that Jennifer is going to talk a lot about that particular aspect of the garden. But we're adjacent to the South Fork of the Palouse. This just shows some of the plots that we manage and keep track of every year. And certainly during COVID, the last 3 years, we've had increased demand. We've actually had to cut out more new plots because so many people were interested in gardening during COVID. So who are we? Well, we have students, both undergrad and grad students. We have low-income people. In fact, we have a program where we provide free plots to low-income people. A lot of immigrants, retired people and seniors, apartment dwellers, some homeowners, and then anyone really wanting to garden. And here's a picture showing some of the gardeners out in the springtime. So what are some of the principles that we operate this garden? First of all, it's an organic garden. We do not allow any fungicides, herbicides, or insecticides. Most of the fertilizer is organic by manure, etc. So again, completely operated organically. Second thing is that members have to donate time to common activities. This is part of our contract. So this can be participating in work parties, mowing the lawn, participating in spring fair, compost pile and weeding, or serving on the board. So in other words, it's not just people coming in and gardening, but in order to build a community and to keep the garden running, people have to donate to the common good. And then the third thing is that members share their experience and knowledge with new gardeners. So one of the missions that we have is a strong involvement in food issues. So we've had food bank gardens since 2000 that were first organized by the Center for Civic Engagement at WSU and a number of other groups. We've worked for many years with the Community Action Center to provide them free plots, and then also with Backyard Harvest out of Moscow to do plots. And Backyard Harvest has a number of different gleaning opportunities. This just shows a picture of the community action plots. This is Joe Astrino, who was running them at the time. So they've built since then a number of other covered structures and everything on these 4 or 5 plots that we give them for free. We're also very interested in education. We've done a lot of workshops, classes with community action, classes with Pullman Parks and Rec. We've had many school groups down here, and also the Future Farmers of America. We put on our website a lot of the gardening columns that Doug Young had written for the Moscow Pullman Daily News. And then we have our spring fair every May where we invite community groups, and this just lists a few of them involved in gardening and the environment to interact with the community. And this is also an open house and also a plant sale that we do every year. Here's a picture from a few years ago. We set up these tents, and then the different groups are under with their different tables. You also see some of the plant sales on the table in the foreground. Here's another example. That's the University of Idaho Master Gardeners. So we invite a lot of different groups to share their knowledge with the people that come to the open house. And here's from last year. We started again. There was about 2 or 3 years where because of COVID we had to cancel it, but we started it last year even though it was raining. We had a very good attendance. Also featured some food trucks and even the Palouse Peace Band. Now, a big part of our education, and I'm sure that Jennifer will talk about this, is our collaborations with the Palouse Conservation District. We've sponsored a number of webinars with them. They helped us do an orientation video for new gardeners. And then over the last few years, they've done a lot of educational events down at the garden, including water quality training, critters in the river, and then pollinator workshop around the pollinator plot that they put in. Here's some of the kids at the pollinator workshop in the spring catching insects. And here's them looking at different insects under the picnic structure. So obviously the third component that we have is the environmental benefits. And I can't overemphasize this, that the garden is really a wildlife habitat in the middle of Pullman, both with the garden and the river. So we've got lots of birds, hawks, owls, snakes, beaver, deer, etc. And we're also a habitat for insects and other invertebrates, especially pollinators, bees and non-natives, butterflies, other beneficial insects. The Palouse Conservation District put in a pollinator garden a few years ago. We have another member that's devoted his whole garden to milkweed. And then because we're adjacent to the trail, we get a lot of people that aren't gardeners but visit the garden, people that are walking, running, biking, walking their dog, etc. And then we also serve as a way for different community groups to become engaged. We often host work parties with fraternities, ROTC, Center for Civic Engagement, and other groups that come in and learn about the garden. So that's about all I have. I put this information down for contacts. We have lots of plots available for next year. We've had to up the rate by $10 this year, so there's $75 a year for a 20 by 20 plot, and that includes the water and the tools. This is our website, our email, and we also have a Facebook contact. And then finally, I'll leave you with this mural on the front of our garden painted by Pat Seiler, who's one of our active gardeners. Pat's a famous Pullman artist who has done a lot of art around. You may see the mural downtown by Thomas Hammer. He did that also. So thank you, and I'll answer any questions. Even though I pre-recorded this, I'll be in the audience.
Okay, thank you so much, Tim, for walking us through some of the history of the garden. And we will have Tim available with us at the end for questions and discussion. So right now I want to shift and turn the conversation and the presentation over to Jeff Sellen, who will be talking about GroundWorks and GroundWorks involvement at the Koppel Farm.
Thanks, Jen. Let me share my screen here. We'll see if that works. I haven't been in Pullman for about 8 years was the last time I was there, so I'm really glad to be there, if only via Zoom. Has that come up yet?
Yes, it's coming up, but it's not showing the presentation mode.
Right.
Yeah, maybe if you click on one of the slides, it'll go in.
There you go. Perfect.
Okay. Well, there we go. Thank you, Tim, for reminding me of the history of the Koppel Farm and Pullman Community Gardens. You mentioned, well, let's see before I get to that. Yeah. So you mentioned that GroundWorks, that Pullman Community Gardens had its start in about 1993, and that was roughly the time that Darren Saul and I created GroundWorks Institute. We were both graduate students at WSU. And also about the same time, I think it was maybe 1994, that we created the Center for Environmental Education at WSU. And it was a useful combination of organizations because it allowed us to access grant money either through our university center or through GroundWorks, which was a community organization, and that kind of flexibility was often very helpful. Here you see some of those early laborers, and I believe you can see your Pullman Conservation District Director, Jennifer Boie, there on the right, and she was for a time, I don't remember what years those were, but she was for a time the director of GroundWorks Institute too, right, Jennifer? It was great having colleagues who were so committed and engaged with the projects, and to kind of take GroundWorks over as Darren and I moved on to different kinds of things. At the same time, as we created GroundWorks and the Center for Environmental Education, we also worked closely with the Center for Civic Engagement, which at the time was the Community Service Learning Center, I believe, at WSU, and has since changed its names. It really had its funding start, though, with a grant from the Department of Ecology, Washington State Department of Ecology. It was federal money funneled through the Department of Ecology for bioengineering work and workshops on the Palouse. And certainly one of the key sites for that was the Koppel Farm area. It was a considerable grant. It was about $240,000, if I remember correctly. And then we later renewed that grant for another chunk of money. So that really provided us with some significant funding to do the restoration work that we were involved in. GroundWorks itself had two main objectives as part of its vision. First of all, protecting and restoring native Palouse habitat. And I think although environmentalists often get a reputation of wanting to set aside nature apart from human influence, we never had that vision as part of what GroundWorks would do. We recognized that nature was in close relationship with culture. And so our second objective was to promote the long-term cultural change necessary to support sustainable ecological practices in the region. And that fueled our education mission, which I think was as important as getting trees in the ground, was the educational activity that was a part of the planting effort. Because Koppel Farm was in really an ideal location. It was close to the campus, so we were able to easily get Washington State students down there. It was close to K through 12 schools in Pullman. It was on the bike path. It was just a great place to work from and work on. This is not Koppel Farm. It's upstream a little bit on Paradise Creek, but this is typical of many Saturday mornings that we had in the spring and the fall, where we would sometimes get up to 50 or maybe even 70 volunteers out there to plant trees or to do bioengineering projects. There, I think that's, I guess that's not Koppel Farm either, but it's closer to downtown Pullman. Those tubes, which provide some level of protection, not always as much as you would like, from voles and other rodents that just love to strip the bark on young trees, are a good sign that something is happening there, and not everything's going to survive those rodents, but some of them will, and that lays the groundwork for a restored stream bank. The bioengineering grant was written, I should say also, I want to mention that Bobby Ryder was one of the major players. She was a PI on that grant. And so she was very important too in getting that initial money. Bioengineering is created to address problems like these, where it's very difficult to do normal planting techniques in order to address erosion, water quality issues. And so bioengineering projects, let's see, there we go. I think I skipped a bit. Yeah, bioengineering projects use special techniques in order to address those kinds of problems. Here you can see I believe they called it a mattress along the side of that vertical bank, a bundle here at the bottom, or something of that nature. I've forgotten if a bundle is the right term. But both of those will help to stabilize the bank, and they are created with willow. And occasionally we use dogwood. Both of those plants will root out if they are watered, if they have connections to the water table or the stream itself. And so you don't need to plant them as bare root plantings, and are very useful in that case. Rob, I've forgotten Rob's last name. He used to be the director of Palouse Conservation District. He used to say that if you kick a bundle of willows off the back of the pickup, it's likely to grow into a clump over the years. I'm not sure it's quite that easy, but it is a nice feature that someone gave to those willows evolutionarily. Here's a bundle put in vertically on a steep slope. Here's a creation of a bundle. Bioengineering is the use of biological materials as opposed to, say, riprap. It tends to focus on individual work by volunteers rather than by professionals using big heavy machinery. And so it really is an ideal cultural experience, an educational experience. You get people out building a bundle like this. Here they are tying willows together, and that will go into that toe of the stream eventually. But as we are building, we are trying to help people get a better understanding of the importance of riparian habitat, get some sense of problems associated with soil erosion, of the cultural impacts of a restored environment. And so that bioengineering grant from the Department of Ecology had this major educational component associated with it. This might be Koppel Farm. Just right by the bridge there's that steep bank. We put a lot of plant material in that area, and there are still steel stakes there, hopefully now buried in the soil. It was important to really wire, and a lot of wire goes in there to wire those things in so they don't get flushed, so these branches and structures don't get flushed downstream and create a flood downtown. We always lived in fear that something terrible like that might happen, but it never did, as far as I know. Anyway, my lawyers have not been in touch with me on any of those issues. But when the floods come up in the spring, they will deposit sediment into these, among these branches and build bank in places where it had been eroding and degrading. That's the purpose of those. And then you can begin to plant in traditional methods. You can begin to plant riparian vegetation into those areas once you've built up the bank. Here we have some willow stakes that went in along the banks too. Here you can see the benefits of willow. That was not planted with a root, but you can see the growth that's occurred in the year or two following its initial planting. We had so many kids from K through 12 schools in Pullman, and those are some of my fondest memories. There's a photo, and the ideal project in my mind was to get about 20 WSU students and about 20 kids from a 3rd grade class, for example, pair them up and send and put them out there to plant. And those were great projects, both for the WSU students and certainly for the K through 12 students too. One of the photos that I have lost over time, and I regret it, it's one of my favorite photos. We were out on a spring day when a snow squall came upon us, and it was one of those projects with 3rd graders, as I remember it. I'm not sure about the age of this girl here. And there was a pair of a WSU student and a 3rd grader out there digging, and we all took cover in kind of a little hawthorn enclosure. And I looked out, and there was still that 3rd grader out there standing amongst the snow that was blowing sideways, making sure that his tree was getting in the ground. I took a photo of it, which was probably not best practice. I think you're supposed to save the kid first and worry about photos later. But he survived, and as far as I know, his tree did too. Let's see, what else might I say? I'm about done here. So our focus was on that 11 acres on the other side of the South Fork of the Palouse, across from the gardens, across the bridge there. And generally speaking, the purpose was, and I think Tim has already gone over many of those things, to address water quality issues, to bring temperature down by shading the stream, reducing soil erosion and sediment in the water, increasing habitat, and those cultural benefits of education, and through restoration of nature, restoring culture too, because after all, we were responsible for a good part of that degradation, and taking on some of those those responsibilities through restoration. Since then, I've gone on and implemented some of those techniques, I moved to Southern Colorado, where we have our own issues, and did some restoration work and work with a community garden there, the Organics Guild at Western Colorado University. And just to wrap up, maybe one more short story that emphasizes the cultural benefit of gardens and ecological restoration. Our Organics Guild was one of the strongest organizations on campus. It's a tough environment. 7,700 feet was the campus, and could get a frost at any month, in any month of the year, and often did. And so they used various methods covering row crops, for example, and obviously there are only certain things you can plant in there. You might as well give up on tomatoes at 7,700 feet. But nearby was a man from India who had moved to Gunnison, Colorado, to be with his family, and had grown food in India. And he would come over, and he could not speak English, and neither could our students in the Organics Guild speak Hindi. But they developed this close relationship associated with growing. He taught them a lot. They probably taught him a few things about growing in Colorado. And I'll always remember that as a key takeaway, a key consequence of this kind of work that we are doing. I think that's a good place for me to stop. I don't have many details in terms of dates, and so if anyone has any more information, if I got anything wrong, please let me know. And if you want to fill in any gaps, if anyone can also tell me, it's like I said, it's been 8 years. I'd sure love to go down there and see what that 11 acres looks like. Ponderosas, so that's what, 30 years ago, 95 to about 30 years ago. Ponderosas can grow quite high in 30 years. And I'm just wondering what the, did the aspens survive? Was it foolish to put in hawthorn in that area? You never know exactly what's going to work and what's not going to work, what's going to survive and what won't survive. So for those of you who have been down there recently, I'd love to hear your take on those restoration efforts and the result of those. Thanks very much, Jen. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Jeff. It's so wonderful to be here tonight and to hear these stories and see all these photos. As I mentioned earlier, I'm just so honored to be able to facilitate this conservation talk. Just a little bit about how I got to this place. I came to Pullman for graduate school almost 22 years ago, and I thought a couple years and I'd get my degree and move on. And it really was that involvement in the Koppel area, the involvement in GroundWorks, the involvement in the Pullman Community Gardens that really allowed me the opportunity to find my place here in my life on the Palouse. And here I am, and I have no plans on going anywhere else. Little visits here and there, but this is home. So just again, speaking to what Tim and Jeff have already talked about, the power of this kind of work to not just do ecological restoration and cultural change, but to change lives as part of that. So I'm a testament to that. I wanted to share a little bit about some of the ongoing work. It's amazing the work that so many community groups have done. And I know that there are a lot more community groups out there. We could talk about this for hours and hear additional stories and et cetera. But there's no way we could cover the influence of all the different groups and volunteers that have been out there. But it's been amazing to hear the foundation that was set by the Pullman Community Gardens and GroundWorks and these other groups, and how it kind of has been a springboard for ongoing work. So I wanted to just share a little bit about what Palouse Conservation District has been doing out there in the past and recent work, as well as some future activities. One thing that was amazing to me in preparing for this is how much that multi-generational investment, and I love seeing those photos throughout the last few decades, and how mentoring the upcoming generations and that integration between restoration and education activities has created this ongoing and continuous strong work down at Koppel and throughout the community. So hopefully you'll get to see a little bit about that as a demonstration as I go through what Palouse Conservation District is doing, because a lot of it is really just an extension of the incredible community work that's been started down there by so many different community groups. So I'm going to share with you a little bit here, if I can get things going. You've heard a little bit about this, that's a little bit of conservation context, and you can see that aerial photograph of Koppel at the confluence of Paradise Creek and the South Fork of the Palouse River. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the resource conservation side here. So some of the concerns as far as resource conservation in that area and some of the goals. So Department of Ecology has a list of various different things that are related to impaired water in that area, including bacteria with fecal coliform, temperature, low dissolved oxygen, pH issues, water quality issues related to historical pesticides, and all of those are kind of that resource concern that provides some of the need for the work that all of these groups have done from an ecological standpoint. As you've heard about already, some of the goals and the improvements that we've seen down there over the last few decades include increased habitat for both terrestrial and aquatic organisms, decreased soil erosion, which has improved water quality. We have increased shade, which is also reduced temperatures and provided better habitat. We have clearer water down there with decreased turbidity and higher levels of dissolved oxygen. Overall, water quality has increased over time, and we have a lot of work that needs to happen. So on the next few slides, I'm going to try to provide enough detail for those who really are interested in the detail of resource conservation and the practices that are going on, but also just try to keep it at a level where everyone can enjoy. So a few photos here. I think a lot of the pictures that Jeff was showing probably wrapped up around 2000. I think GroundWorks Institute ended up kind of going in different ways around 2009 or so. So this is the earliest work I could find photos of from Palouse Conservation District back in 2010. And you can see again, the work that's out there, very similar to the work that was being done with the other community groups. We've got students out there from WSU. We have AmeriCorps members out there. We have community members and residents all doing this continued restoration work. Wrapped around weed control primarily, planting of native species, so native woody vegetation, and also recreation focus. So we'll see some photos in here of some trail work that's been done out there. Over the years, we heard a little bit from Jeff about some of those initial grants that provided some funding, and just wanted to talk about what's been fueling the work. You can see primarily this all grew out of work on the ground, community volunteer hours and donations. We've also had additional funding out there from Department of Ecology. We have recently had some new funding sources that have been investing in Koppel Farm. We've had the National Association of Conservation Districts, who we've had several proposals submitted through that funding source to fuel this ongoing work. We've also had funding through the Washington State Conservation Commission and through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, their 5-star and urban waters restoration program. As many of you have heard, there's a lot of emphasis right now on urban agriculture, and as well as making sure that we're creating and protecting these green spaces. So you can see this image here showing the Pullman community, and that area, that pinkish area there is showing the location of Koppel Farm. And you can see that this is a huge green space right here in the midst of our otherwise urban center in Pullman. And that has been of interest to a lot of our funders recently in providing funding. Is they're interested in the restoration work, they're interested in the education, the community engagement, they're also interested in preserving this green space and this hub of conservation that's at the heart of Pullman. More recently, in 2021, we've been able to get some funding, and Tim talked about this, and install pollinator plots. And so you can see in some of the photos here, some of the pollinator plots and demonstration gardens that have been installed with AmeriCorps, PCD staff and community members again. You can also see one of our AmeriCorps members in the top left there who installed a bee hotel. And then down below, some additional habitat features in these native demonstration gardens, as well as interpretive signs explaining those benefits of pollinators and native species. Talking a little bit more about the ongoing restoration work and primarily that other 11 acres that you've heard Tim and Jeff talk about, that's outside of the community garden plot area. We've installed a number of conservation practices. So we've done a lot of site preparation, mowing, weed control, also installing mulch to prepare the ground for plantings. I'm going to get into some of those details for those who want to know the specs out there. We use the Natural Resources Conservation Service specs when we do our restoration and our planting plans. And so we've been focusing on installing plants in that area along the water or the riparian buffer zone. And our goal is to have about 400 plants per acre. And our focus area in the last couple of years has really been a 5-acre area. You'll see some planting plans here in a few moments. We use a variety of different types of plant materials, container stock, as well as bare root plant stock to do establishment of native trees and shrubs. We also do a lot of weed control. I think if you ask Tim, Jeff, myself, any other community members on here who have been involved at Koppel, that has been a constant. We're always out there doing weed control. And then again, installing some mulch like you see in the photo here. This helps us with weed suppression, it helps establishment of the trees and shrubs that we're planting, and also helps with moisture retention, which reinforces better establishment. So you can see just a variety of different plants that we install. So here are some of the species that were listed on a recent planting plan that Garrett Lasavita put together, who is one of our conservation planners here at Palouse Conservation District, as well as a planting plan and a map here. Of course, the best plans have to be flexible. So depending on what's going on in an individual year, we might flex the type of species that are going out there, the time frame, or whether we're using bare root plants or container stock. But you can see some of the recent plantings from spring of 2022. You can see that we are doing plantings both in some of the upland areas as well as along the riparian areas. And we're also not just using bare root and container stock, but we're also doing a lot of willow plantings. Again, some more photos from fall of this year, additional planting, some focus in some different areas, and then jumping off from where Jeff was talking about a lot of that in-stream work and installing willows and doing the bioengineering work. We're continuing to do more of that stream bank stabilization out there in different areas. You can see some photos here of Robert, our current Veterans Conservation Corps member, working with a WSU student to install some bank stabilization structures. We've had an incredible amount of interest and involvement still from the Center for Civic Engagement, as well as individual WSU classes out on the site. Kind of looking at ongoing maintenance, we're doing replanting, watering, and weed control out there. We're monitoring the plantings and their survival throughout the year. We're continuously looking at removing any dead plants and replacing those, and then we help supplement with some watering when it's needed. I'm sure folks have noticed there's lots of animal activity out there, and one of the purposes is to provide habitat, which is wonderful. Sometimes the animals like to move in before the habitat's ready. So we've been experimenting with different ways to make sure that we are getting new plantings established. And so you can see in the photo here, a variety of different tubes. Jeff mentioned some other tubes that we've used in the past. We're also using some of these cages to help provide a physical barrier to beavers, deer, and other small rodents. We're using a variety of different techniques, including wolf urine and other types of plant skid products, which is a pheromone deterrent to some of the animals chewing and nibbling and snacking on these plants. And then also trying some different techniques for beaver control in particular, including painting the bark on established plants and spraying new plants to provide some protection there. I want to talk about some of the other things that all feed into the restoration part of this. Another partner program that comes in from the city of Pullman is the Adopt a Stream program. We've had several different sponsors of different stream segments out there, as you can see indicated on the different signs here. And again, it's just a wonderful opportunity to get folks out there, to have them invest in the landscape and have an ongoing relationship. We've also hosted stream cleanups on a regular basis, and we often go through the Koppel as part of that stretch of the stream cleanup. In addition to the restoration activities, just want to talk a little bit more about some of the community engagement and the education out there. We have ongoing K through 12 work. I always loved doing education down there with GroundWorks. I love knowing that we continue at Palouse CD to do education down there. And in addition to those K through 12 activities, there's a variety of other science initiatives that we've done with the community, and you can see a few of those represented here. And Koppel has been just a fantastic location. I think Jeff mentioned that as well. It's a great location in the community to really bring everybody together. So we've used the Koppel site to do some specific bio blitzes as part of the City Nature Challenge and looking at pollinators and species identification of other plants and animals. We've also been able to use it as a training ground for the Confluence Crew program, which is a citizen-led water quality monitoring program. And then we've done pollinator work down there, as Tim mentioned as well. And I just want to show just a few photos because they're so fun of some of these events in action. Here's the Confluence Crew training, where we're actually out there training folks from the community as they take on this community monitoring. And I see that we even have some folks here that are in the training that are in our session with us tonight. So a big thank you to folks who are online with us this evening that are part of the Confluence Crew program. We host Critters in the River events down there. That's been really popular. You can see how many community members are engaged in these events. This will be an ongoing annual event that we'll be hosting down there. And I'm sure this is making Jeff reminisce, because GroundWorks used to do a lot of these similar types of activities down in the same location here at Koppel Farm, going back a decade or even two ago. So we continue with the Critters in the River. We also continue with the pollinator work and incorporating the demonstration gardens out there. And here's a couple photos from some of the recent What's Buzzing at Koppel events. And this will again continue to be an ongoing opportunity for the community to engage at Koppel. Other grants that we've been able to pull in that have been wrapped around Koppel include the Washington State Conservation Commission recent grant for local food access. And you can see Garrett Lasavita, one of our conservation planners, who's been really engaged down at Koppel, also helped bring in some of this funding to get the community more involved in gardening and providing local food. And we were able to do some work down at Koppel, some at the Pullman Community Farmers Market, as well as some of the other locations in town to give away free plants to folks to encourage their gardening and also increase food access. We'll also be installing a box down at Koppel Farm in collaboration with Backyard Harvest for gardeners to be able to get some excess fresh produce that they have to the local community pantries. And then just in wrapping up here, just thinking about not only the education work that's happened down at Koppel, not only the gardening work and the restoration, but also just Koppel as a gathering place. So I pulled a couple photos. We had a Palouse Conservation District staff meeting down there that you can see in the photo on the right. We all just wanted to be down at Koppel. This was during COVID. We wanted to be outdoors, and Koppel was just a great place. So it's just a great example of a way that it's continuing to bring people together. On the left, you can see Darren Saul, the other co-founder of GroundWorks. He was referenced earlier in Jeff's talk. He's down there leading a tour of our staff, talking about the history and some of the work down at Koppel. And then in closing, before we open it up for questions and conversation, I just wanted to share some of the words that the community has used to describe Koppel and what it means as being a hub to the community. And so I've got just a few quotes I wanted to share here. And talking about Koppel as serving as a conservation showcase to the community by engaging small acreage farmers, community members, and the public through workshops, events, educational opportunities, and native habitat installations. Another reflection, talking about it being a resource for the city of Pullman and providing important habitat for insects and wildlife, working to end food insecurity and providing educational opportunities. As a place to develop solutions for urban agriculture and showcase conservation practices to the community. Volunteer opportunities, community engagement, and educational programming for students to engage in real-world challenges. Koppel as a refuge for wildlife and insects, especially pollinators. Koppel offering a variety of projects that address degraded water quality of the Palouse River, the tributaries, including volunteer events and educational programming on soil health, water quality, wildlife habitat. Koppel is being cherished for its public gardens and natural areas. A community-driven movement for environmental conservation and restoration, and improving water quality and habitat along the rail corridor as that improves the recreation experience for trail users. And then finally, fostering a deeper understanding of students' role and responsibilities as stewards of place on the Palouse. So I just thought in reflection and pulling together some of these testimonies, I wanted to share those with you all. And with that, I'm going to open it back up to the community and see if there's any other questions, discussion, or any other reflections that anybody who's with us this evening would like to share.
Jen, we did have a couple questions come in with registrations if you're willing to field those.
Sure.
The first question was, which fish species are set to benefit most from this restoration?
Okay, great. Thank you. I actually had an opportunity to talk with Garrett Lasavita, who you've heard her name several times this evening, since she's been one of our conservation planners and a staff member at Palouse CD who's been closely involved down there. She's also a biologist by training, and so she did a little bit of research on this question for us. And so Garrett says that we have some sand rollers and minnows down there, possibly. There could be a rare smallmouth bass in the wider area. And if the river was healthier, it might be able to support rainbow trout, but it's pretty doubtful as it is because it's pretty warm and shallow water. So that's an answer focused on the resident fish species. Also, when we kind of go to the larger context, we can talk about some of the regional fish species that are impacted downstream. Obviously, we have the Palouse Falls, our state waterfall. That's a barrier to anadromous fish coming up to Pullman. But downstream of Palouse Falls in that lower section, the lower few miles downstream, we also have critical fish species down there, including steelhead and chinook. So water quality and all the work we do up here eventually makes its way downstream and impacts all of those downriver Snake River species.
Awesome. We also had a question, How can volunteers get involved?
Great. Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about volunteers? from your perspective?
Yeah, certainly. We're always looking for volunteers, either being a gardener or participating in work parties, etc. So even if you don't have a garden, we're always looking for volunteers. So you can just email the koppelgardens@gmail.com if you want to get more information. And we're also looking for even outside board members that are interested in getting involved.
Great. And then from Palouse Conservation District perspective, I'll just throw up the slide here just because it lists some of the ways folks can get involved. And it's also serves as a thank you. Yeah, please get involved with Pullman Community Gardens. There's lots of community partners down there. We have ongoing volunteers who are community members as well as students. Palouse Conservation District runs several volunteer events per week, often in the spring and fall. So if you get on our website, you can check that out. We also offer ongoing activities through what we call our community events, Plant the Palouse events, or on campus through Center for Civic Engagement. We have several opportunities, often multiple times a week there as well. Just want to say thank you. Another way to get involved, if you want to do more time, is AmeriCorps. We have Veterans Conservation Corps. They're very involved out there as well. So those are a few ways that you can get involved. I'll also say you can get involved through the backyard harvest on the food security side and donating excess produce to go to our local food pantries, and we'll have a box down at Koppel to collect some of that produce soon as well.
Hello,
Hi.
Jennifer.
Yes, we can hear you.
Jennifer, I have to go to Ronnie Hatley here. I have to go to a meeting with the Palouse Prairie Foundation. I've left a message about my early involvement in the farm on the what is it called, the chat button.
Yep.
But I have to go right now. So sorry, I won't be able to say anything.
Thanks, Ron. I've got that all down.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And that's also another great plug. You can get involved with the Palouse Prairie Foundation and other groups like Phoenix Conservancy that do Palouse Prairie work, native plant work. We're really sad that this and that Palouse Prairie annual meeting are on the same evening. And so I could encourage folks to run to the 1912 Center and go to the Palouse Prairie annual meeting. That's another great way to volunteer and get involved. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, if you haven't seen it, Jen, there's some really great conversation happening in the chat as well. So people sharing their own experiences with the Koppel family and the Koppel Farm area. So some really great testaments there. I don't see any other questions. If you have any further questions, definitely feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself. In the meantime, do any of our speakers have any last thoughts or words that they would like to share about Koppel?
No, yeah, just briefly again, I realize that next year will be 30 years since it started, and it seems like time has flown by so much, and all the people that have been involved and really the impact that it's had on the community and will continue to have on the community. So, we're always looking for volunteers, trying to do fundraising, trying to keep things going with our volunteers. So, yeah, we really thank all the support of not only the community, but also all those funding agencies over the years like United Way that have really helped us out.
And I would kick myself if I did not mention, as I think I forgot to, that Loretta Annawalt was so important to so much of this early work, and Pullman Civic Trust. Loretta always used to say, we used to have some grand illusions about being an institute, which we originally were, GroundWorks Institute. Loretta always used to say, just plant trees, and the more trees, the better. And I think ultimately she was right. But Pullman Civic Trust was important, and certainly the Koppels, who really gave something very precious to the community. And I'm so glad that it still continues. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jeff. Yeah. boy, there's so many folks who are an inspiration, and there is a dogwood planted along the South Fork of the Palouse River that we planted in honor of Loretta Anawalt, and that still thrives to this day. And I just want to echo what an incredible place and what a special place the Koppel area is for so many people. And it just really inspires me to see how it's brought so many community groups together to focus on and celebrate conservation from so many different aspects, whether it's organic gardening, riparian restoration, habitat, recreation, education. It's really a gem in the community. So thanks everybody for your time this evening, for sharing your reflections and your history and all of your investment, your volunteer time out there over the years, and just continuing to inspire me every single day. So thank you all.